Hello, I'm Calvin Morris and I'm here once again to talk about Red Dwarf XI, and this time it's the episode Officer Rimmer. I'm going to try to keep this as relatively spoiler free as possible. I'm going to talk about the synopsis more than anything else, and what I thought of the episode obviously, but I might leak a couple of little things about the plot in this review. With that being said, let's talk about the good, let's talk about the bad, the things I liked, the things I didn't. Let's talk about Officer Rimmer. And right off the bat, I'm going to tell you, I think this episode missed the mark. I've got to keep reminding myself that this is a lark in space, that it is not a serious thing, that you know, it's not there to dramatically move story along. But with episodes of Red Dwarf, Red Dwarf tends to have self-contained stories per episode, and they usually have some structure to the story. They usually go in one particular direction. This story, it felt to me, was a retread of Rimmerworld, and I don't like that. It felt like a cheap knockoff of its own story. The other thing about this episode is that I felt that a lot of the gags didn't land. They just completely missed out. There was a lot of gags in this episode, and I felt that they were silly gags. They weren't as clever as what we've had before. I didn't find myself in a laugh out loud situation. I laughed throughout the episode, but it wasn't really, you know, I didn't have to pause it to stop it or anything because I was laughing so much. It just sort of went there. It wasn't great. The other thing about this episode was that, like I said, it was basically silly, and to talk about that, I'm gonna just let one thing slip, which is the bioprinter. The bioprinter, which prints off multiple copies of Rimmer, which I don't think is a spoiler because it is in the synopsis. But the actual printer itself is just like a giant bubble jet printer. That's a lazy gag. They've done similar sort of things like that before, like in the episode where Crichton becomes human. Forgot the name of it. Don't know why. But it wasn't as clever as that. It was literally just a giant bubble jet printer. It's something that you'd expect to find in something like Police Squad or you know, something like that, which is just nonsensical and just playing it for the gag. The other thing I felt about this episode was that once again I felt this episode started too soon and ended too soon. I felt that the main focus of the story was missing where the focus should have been. For example, Rimmer opens up an officers' club, and I feel that's where the story should have been. That they should have got to that point sooner, and the officers' club should have been the story. You know, the end part was, it wasn't as good. It wasn't as good as Rimmerworld. The end, the resolve of it was fire bullets, and no, that's not what you want from Red Dwarf. It paced okay, but again, the problem here was the fact that they were playing gags just for the sake of gags, and the story itself wasn't strong enough, so they were just sort of, it felt like they were just filling time. There's really not a lot left to say about this episode. There's really not. I felt that as I was watching it, I knew what was coming next. I knew what was going to happen. I knew, the second they showed the officer's lift, I knew what the next gag was going to be. It was obvious. It was lazy. Let's call it like it is. It was a lazy episode. It wasn't awful, so you know, it's one of those things that you can go back and rewatch maybe at a future time, but it's not like one of the classic episodes like Meltdown or Gunmen of the Apocalypse. It's not one of those that you can love and rewatch and tack into. This episode is really, like I said, it's a knockoff version of one of its previously done stories, and not done as well. There were some good things in there. Like for example, I like the Rimmer Quartet. Some of the jokes that Lister made about Liverpudlian call centres, those sort of things were okay, but it just didn't work. Again, had they focused the story more on the Officers Club, so you could have seen what was going on, the interactions going on in that club, I think there were a lot more jokes to be mined from there. Cat liked the episode as well, so I didn't even notice Danny John Jules hardly in this episode. This was mainly, obviously this was mainly a Rimmer episode, but at the same time, it felt like some of the other members of the cast were kind of superfluous. So for me, this episode just didn't hold any water whatsoever, and hopefully they'll raise the standards by the next one. I don't have, this was sort of back to earth standard, I'm afraid. I don't like saying that. That gives me that makes my skin crawl. But anyway, yeah, that's what I thought of the episode. Lame jokes, missed the mark, not a very good plot, started in the wrong place, finished in the wrong place, focus of the story was directed at the wrong thing, and yeah, just a retread of a story we've already seen. Anyway, that's what I thought of this episode of Red Dwarf. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of this episode of Red Dwarf. Feel free to like this video, subscribe to this channel, or go over and join me on Google+. But until next time, I'll see you later, guys.